So it is 5:30. I'm going to call the meeting to order. So before I do introductions, I just want to add an announcement. So, okay, can I do that to the, all right. So with that, present this evening are Chief Paul Falls, Brian Grimm, Jasper Krugel, myself, Lisa Whalen, council members Kathleen Refkin, Ann McGregor, Peter Vickery, Claudia Lacey, engineer Allison Fauski, and Gary Peters, and Ellie Polfus, and Don Mutzko. So the announcement I have, if I can, okay. So we got the $200,000 from this very, very generous donor in Minnetrista, and it had been earmarked, if you will, for police and wellness. And I called Brahma Krati, who is the owner of Lifetime Fitness. We had a very, very good and positive discussion, and they are very interested in helping out with this project. And so we are meeting, the police and Jasper and I are meeting with them, with their team, on May 10th. And he indicated that there's some equipment that they could donate. He has a crew that does all their work for construction work, so they might be able to do that. So anyhow, it sounds, and I told him we had a $200,000 budget because that's what we have. And he said he thinks he can work with that. That should be good. So nothing set in stone yet, but I just thought it was very exciting that we can get this done, and it sounded like it's going to be done very quickly, too. So, yes, so that's the announcement. I have other announcements, but I'll hold off on that. All right. Yeah. So, with that, we have a couple other things on our agenda: strategic planning continuation, and then also our stormwater ordinance discussion. So I'll hand it over to Jasper.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. First thing we're going to talk about is kind of an extension of our strategic planning session that we had roughly a month ago already. So we're going to talk a little bit about staffing, and you'll see some items on the city council agenda tonight related to that, especially with the police department. And then we'll talk a little bit about consultant services and just have an open conversation about that. And then talk about facilities, which Lisa kind of had a little preamble about, with partnerships with Lifetime and that type of thing. And there's a public safety bill going through the Senate, or it's hung up in the Senate right now, that there's some money, potentially one-time money that could come in for public safety related items too. We'll talk about. So we'll jump right into the staffing piece and really talk about the police department staffing and what kind of is developing there. And we had a personnel committee meeting. What was it? A couple weeks ago now.
Last week.
It was last week. Okay, last week.
It was Wednesday of last week, not even a week ago.
Wow. I guess. Where the direction, you'll see on the consent agenda tonight, there's an offer for an existing CSO that we have, contingent on him becoming a licensed peace officer and going through skills. So that's on there. Essentially what that is, and we talked about this briefly on at the last strategic planning session, was that essentially sets the table for a 15th officer, potentially to even get hired this year, but really have some budget implications for 2024. So that was the direction from the personnel committee, that those action items are kind of in process right now. So I just want to make sure that's clear to the group that those things are happening. And once we go down that path, we can't really go back, and it's hard to go back. So, are there any questions about just the police department and the staffing levels and things like that? I know Chief Falls sent out an email shortly after the strategic planning session, kind of talking about some of the metrics and statistics of area police agencies compared to Minnetrista. So, some of those numbers I think maybe were helpful to. As well to kind of support that 15th officer. So I'll entertain any questions. Paul can entertain any questions. Allie's kind of facilitating the obvious hiring process and continued posting for that 15th officer. So.
No, I just want to make a comment. Thank you for the stats, because that did make a difference to me, to actually hear where we stand and how many officers we have versus other cities surrounding us. It was important to know that.
Good. You're very welcome. I think it's important to know that, you know, a lot of the cities we compare to, we are growing faster than they are.
Yeah.
So we kind of have a different challenge than some of our comparable cities, but you're very welcome.
Yeah, and one thing I think everybody's aware of is just the kind of challenges with hiring, and just the market is so small and compressed right now that, you know, we've had a posting for, what is it, Allie, probably 16 months, 14 months?
I mean, ongoing for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
Just from turnover and everything. So.
And we've gotten some good candidates, and we've interviewed them, but sometimes they end up staying where they're at or going to a different agency. So it is a struggle. So if we do get a good candidate, 15th officer candidate, I think it's important that we're able to move on it. So that's appreciated, I'm sure, from everybody. So, all right.
Oh, I'd like to
Yeah.
just, about the financial impact, it does sound like it would be significant that, from talking with you, Brian, that we have to kind of keep that in mind when we're looking at other things, because
Yep.
that seems like I think that's a priority to have the 15th officer, but it may mean that, you know, we're not doing other things.
We talked about that at the Personnel Committee meeting too. And so my question to Brian or to the chief, whatever, was, okay, so this 15th officer, how is that going to impact us on a percentage basis for increase for next year? And I think we determined it would be about a 3% increase for next year. Does that give me
Yeah, at least it's 2.5%.
about 2.5 to 3%?
Yeah.
That's just for the police officers. I mean, just for that extra position. But then we have to look at roads, and also we have union contracts coming up and increases for also our police department. So we looked at all of that, and we're looking at just in wage increases for next year. We're probably looking at, what was it, like 7%, we thought? Close to 7%. And then with our road budget increase, might be around 3%. So we're getting up there. We might be in that double digit. This past year we were at 9.1.
Yeah, basically 9%.
9.1.
Yeah.
So keeping that in mind.
You probably have a lot more experience in knowing what the community will deal with, but there was on Nextdoor a write-up from someone from Greenfield, where Greenfield residents went ballistic because they had
like 18 or 20%.
Yes, it was like 18 to
Yeah.
20%.
Yeah.
And then they said that they felt that the range should be 8 to 10.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that's a fairly common resident thing that comes up, that they understand 8 to 10, or is that...
Well, it's in the past we've never done that big of jumps.
Okay.
And there's a couple reasons why. Right now, one of the bigger jumps is pay. Pay our staff and the union contracts coming up, and we know with the police department we are going to be having to do a pretty significant increase for their wages. We just know that based on everything else that we've been seeing in other cities that have already signed their contracts. So that's one. So staffing in wages is what's driving this. That's the biggest ticket item. So as Jasper mentioned, we don't know that this will go through, but if the governor's proposal, he's making two proposals, either a $300 million or a $550 million proposal to be spent on on policing. And so every community and every county that has sheriff's departments and police departments will get a cut of that $300 or $550 million. If that goes through, if it's the $550, we would get right now, as it sits, about $690,000. That can be used for policing in any manner that we so choose. We can't count on that because we won't know that until about the middle or end of May. If it's $300,000, what is it? $360,000? Do you know? 300 approximately.
Well, the $300 million.
Yeah, a ballpark. If it's only the $300 million, we would get about the $360,000. So we'll know more as we get into our budgeting process. We hope to know by then. However, we can't count on that. So worst case scenario is we would be picking up the entire tab for that this coming year.
Would that state grant be a one-time grant?
It'd be a one-time grant, and we can use it, my understanding, the way it's right now, and again, it might change, who knows, through committees and all of that. but we can use it, and we could use it over multiple years too to kind of ease into it. Right. So that was one thing I was going to ask if I've been asked if to support this piece of legislation. I'm like, yeah, I'm on board. Just send me whatever you want me to sign. But I want to make sure that that's okay with all of you. I think we do want the money. I mean, so if that explains it.
Yep. Yeah. And so an update on that bill is there's a Senate file that's sitting there. There isn't a House companion bill at this time, but if the Senate passes it, likely there could be. There's just a lot of politicking going on right now. So
We can't count on it.
yeah, so it's up in the air. I think it's generally policing is supported by both parties. It's just there's politics getting in the way of some of this. So we'll see. We'll track that bill. That bill is Senate File 2416. So if you want to search it and follow it, and you can look at it that way. So, but if I hear anything, I'll be sure to share it with the council. So, but yeah, that can be used for. It's very vague. Anything that is related to policing, basically. So,
It's sort of similar to CARES was.
It is.
2020, the CARES money from the federal.
Right.
I mean, I think it started out a little more detailed and then got a little more vague as cities were having
Right.
trouble meeting some of those different more narrow things at first. So.
yeah. So that's what I have for the policing. And we did talk briefly about the public works side and how that works and what we're likely propose in the budget. A lot of that is related to enterprise funds, not levy. They're separate, but they're equally important because one has an impact on your taxes, one has an impact on your utility rates. So once we start the budget process, I think Brian and I have been brainstorming just some of these things that we need to talk about and set up a plan for regarding the budget. And there's, kind of nickel and dime our way back to kind of, we'll call it normal from getting outside one-time funding that we've relied on for operations. So we're going to have to wean ourselves off of that over the next couple of years. It's just at what pace we want to do that and at what level. So we'll have to keep that in mind. I think we have a good roadmap to figure out or lay it out for city council to make those decisions.
But kind of also, and I don't know if I really answered your question. So we've never had a big, like a 10 or 12% increase. But now last year we had a 9.1% increase and we had nobody.
Right.
Now one of the things that offsets that increase is our growth. I don't know what kind of growth we're going to have this year for 2024 levy, but that does offset it a bit. So if you have a 9% increase in your budget, but you have a 3% new home valuation increase, it kind of offsets it a bit. So that does help us out where Greenfield doesn't have that.
Okay.
And so when we go through the budget process, hopefully you'll point that out again so we see what a real, and then we also go through and point out what a real increase would mean, I mean, in dollars. Because I think dollars speaks more volumes than percentages.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Because I think we've tried to show our per capita levy. If you take our tax levy divided by the number of residents we have, and we show that usually in the audit and stuff in the budget process, where we actually are probably in the middle, right in the middle, if not even a little bit on the lower end. Because some of these other cities have done, I think Orono and Medina did 20% increases last year.
Yeah.
So there's been some things that have really, they're inflationary items. There's capital projects that some of these cities are doing or in the process
Right.
of, but no different than we have capital projects too, or what I know, so roads and so, yeah, we'll try to lay it out last year. I think we said these are the things we're sort of locked into, and then these are the things you want to add a 3% to the roads levy, or do you want to keep it where it is, and some of those things are really the ones that the council will be able to look at and decide, and is 10% okay, or 12, or 14, or 8, or I guess that's what.
Why not 14?
I think one year we did do like 06 or something. We did a 4. The only one year I can remember one being that high. So it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So
All right. Okay? Questions? Okay?
All right, the next staffing discussion that I'd like to have everyone participate in is kind of a conversation that I think came up with almost everybody I spoke to about when we received the professional services agreement for engineering services, and this is I've talked to Allison and Adam about this, and kind of how growing communities kind of have to evaluate these types of things because they're big ticket items, right? Like when you see a professional services agreement and you have a construction administration or observation, that's a big number. For a community like Minnetrista, the reason why we don't just have somebody on staff is because we don't do a project at this scale every year. So kind of the questions that I have just to kind of have a conversation are, is this something that we want to look at? Because we really have consultant services with WSB for engineering. We have legal. Those are kind of our two core areas that we have that we partner with. I want to make sure it's clear that it's not we can just hire a city engineer, one person, to do all the stuff that WSB provides for us. It's really that's not how it works. Really, I kind of think of Allison as kind of a client management specialist. I don't know what you call yourself, but she really, she manages the relationship between the city and like their core group of engineers. She's an engineer, but they have engineers she oversees that, the designers, they have people designing, doing stormwater stuff, all those different things for us. What we would do potentially with the engineering side is there a service area that makes sense to look at maybe bringing in-house? Couple things we would have to consider is, when's our next project? When are we going to do another big project that we're going to have, a significant amount of construction observation? And I want to make sure everybody understands that one person won't be able to do all of it. We'd need a team or need supplement from WSB, but there's likely, on those years, it'll make a lot of sense that we have a project that we'd hire somebody. But on the off years that we don't, then that person would have to then do other stuff. And we'd have to, the process to even evaluate that would be, well, what's the job description? What would they do on those off years? The on years is pretty easy, and just kind of look at that holistically to see if that's something that we want to start talking about and potentially thinking about bringing in-house, at least some portions of it.
Jasper, could we, contact the League of Minnesota Cities and say how many cities our size have their own in-house engineer? Is that a question they would answer?
We could. I think we could. We kind of know. I know Gary probably has connections with other engineering. It's generally, I would say, I draw the line at maybe 20,000 people. You have I don't know, Allison probably knows, but 20,000 is generally where you might have some engineering staff or engineering members. I want to say, I'll use Northfield, for example. They're right around 20,000 or so. They have an engineering manager, and then they have an engineering technician. So the manager's kind of facilitating the bidding process, working with the consultants to design the projects. The engineering technician is doing the construction observation and doing those types of things. They also have a stormwater person that does all the stormwater management, which is kind of timely with the ordinance update too. So, that's kind of the line. I don't know if there's, you do get some one-off things where, you might have a city that has 5 years of big projects and they say, let's hire somebody because this makes a lot of sense. And we can maybe save some money or maybe increase the number of hours per dollar that we get. So it'd be something that, we'd have to form a team really, Brian, myself, probably Gary, to see what will work, because that, in all likelihood, that would fall under Gary's umbrella, I would say.
There's very few the size of us and that would have their own in-house engineering firm. And that's not what Jasper is recommending. So the engineering design and work would still be done by WSB or contracted. However, my observation and my conversation with Jasper was, well, do we want to start thinking, if we're going to be doing large street projects, can we hire somebody to be the on-site manager or observer and do that type of thing? Because when you look at the projects for this year, it's like over $600,000 that we're spending on contracted to do that. Now, I'm not saying it's not worth it. It definitely is, and we need that done. But is it something in the future we want to look at to see, is this something we should be doing in-house? So it's not the engineering services itself, it's more the management of the projects itself.
Yeah.
What would this person do in off years?
Well, in off-season too.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we'd have to look at. There's some things that I think that they could do related to development, some site inspections. I know Gary's talked to me about like boulevard tree installations, making sure somebody's out there observing that and making sure that they're installed correctly, because once they're installed and the developer walks away, there are trees, and then if they die in 5 years, we have to replace them. Or 1 year.
Listen, 1 year. We
So-
do have a 2-year guarantee, but after 2 years, nothing.
So we'd have to look at that, right? Because it's not as busy as it would be during a construction season. Even in the winter, it's just something that they could be cross trained and do some snow plow, trail plowing, whatever it is, that type of thing. We'd have to get creative because there isn't. I would say right now there isn't year-round work that is consistent enough just to say you're going to do this.
Some of it we probably want to look at because it's not just city projects. There's construction observation for the land use ones, or the ones that are developer driven. We'd want to look at. And obviously, Woodland Cove was always our biggest, but it's starting to
Right,
wind down
it's
over
winding
time.
down,
So,
right.
do we have anything else coming in? Because there's always engineering time each month that's built, and you need to go out and look at these and make sure they're doing what they need to do, whether it's the stormwater or whatever. So, you probably want to try to plank that out too, as far as
Yeah.
And I think if we consider that, it probably wouldn't be next year is my guess, but whenever it's considered, maybe what if we combined it with the need for another public works person? So I know, as we continue to grow, we're going to need another public works person, and maybe that would be the time then to kind of create this hybrid, yeah, and employee, and list out everything. But then the other thing we'd want to see is, okay, how much is this going to cost, and how much is it saving? I think that's the biggest issue.
And if I may add, one of the biggest challenges with this market is finding somebody that has that skill set and that's willing to do that, because in all likelihood, it's a capitalistic market, right? We could get somebody in entry level, get them all trained in, and then they go and work for WSB or one of the other many consulting firms
Don't you dare.
that need people like that, because they're also they're also
looking,
struggling to find people. So that's the biggest. I think in my mind that's the biggest challenge, is finding the right person for it. Not that it's impossible, but that just
Right.
it would be hard.
Yeah. And especially you want them with some experience too, probably.
Yeah, definitely. So, basically what, I'm seeing a lot of nodding. Is that something that we would form a kind of a team to evaluate the services, and see if there's a surface area that maybe it makes sense to talk about more. Like Lisa said, maybe this doesn't make sense to do until we do another big project, and that's kind of the kickoff. And that, is 25 or 26. So another 2 to 3 years.
Well, you have to hire them before. the
you'd want to get them on
project
board
starts.
and
You
stuff
wanna
and get some experience. Or
Yeah, I think it's for construction observation, big ticket item. I think our next year that we're talking about bonding is 26, based on that CIP. And that can change. So I agree. So we're probably talking,
25 or
develop
something,
it,
yeah.
maybe start really digging into it in 24, and then maybe hire in 25, something like that.
It seems like, to your point, it really would be good to talk to some cities that have somebody that, maybe that'll give some ideas of what they do and how it's worked out, because it's hard. It sounds like it's kind of hard to visualize them, being busy all the time. So there must be some cities that are similar to us.
And how they would implement and help us save money, other than just constantly.
Right.
Yeah.
Although maybe a retiree would work in the summer and then want to be a snowbird in the winter. I mean,
That's a great idea.
seriously. I don't know. Just
That's
a
like
thought.
that's like the perfect storm.
Yeah.
Actually, that's
But-
a great plus.
Yeah.
But also, there may not, and I just want to plant this seed too. There may not be a financial savings, we'll say. We hope there is, but there will be maybe more hours available for that person to work. So you hope that it equals out, that there's financial savings, but really you're also increasing that service level potentially too, because our rate is lower than what we pay, the WSB rate.
Yeah,
for
we
that
have
kind
an
of stuff, or any
extra cost
consulting.
too,
Yeah.
though. We have para and we have life insurance, we have health
Yeah.
insurance. And
So I just want to, I don't think that any of this exercise will result in a big windfall of money. I just want to set that expectation.
Okay.
But really, I think it could increase maybe service level, more hours per dollar that we get from that service area. So is that, this is the very preliminary discussion about this. That's something that you want us to kind of talk about and maybe dive into, look at some of the billings, David's also somebody that we should talk to development wise, as far as what kind of things we could maybe do in-house versus use a consultant for.
Yes.
Okay,
Seen a lot of nodding.
go
Okay.
for it.
Yes.
All right. We'll move on to facilities. We've kind of Lisa kind of talked about this in the beginning. So we really, the whole facility conversation, I've talked to all the directors. Obviously, City Hall is City Hall. There's stuff that we could do here. Is there anything immediate that we need to really dial in right now? Probably not. But in the next 5 years, at least 10 years, probably look at some sort of refresh, paint. There's some sheetrock stuff. Gary's got a big old list of stuff, I know. And we do our best, and the public works crew does their best to maintain and help out. But eventually, this building was built, I believe, in 90. So we're looking at, it's 30 years old, 35 to 40 years old. Probably look at that. So keep that in mind. There's nothing that we're really proposing at all right now. I sent an email out about the community development staff moving over there because they were talking about having a more collaborative workspace where they can kind of talk freely, or Nick is on the phone and Robert can be on the phone and they're not competing with each other, so you can get louder. So that'll be helpful in that sense. So that kind of, I think, short term solved some of the community development department kind of challenges that they brought up to me. So there isn't really anything here at City Hall right now, but there will be at some point in time. In the near term, but the facilities talk for the.
When is this building paid for? Is it already paid for?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's been paid for.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the police will be paid for in 28.
2030. I want to say it was right around 2030.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was like 2010, I think. When it was.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, if there was substantial renovations or additions or whatever, it'd be nice to kind of hold off until that's paid for and then do the next
That'd be a
round.
good time.
2030.
No.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Okay.
But going over to the public safety building, Lisa was talking about the wellness area and the wellness kind of donation that we received from a resident of $200,000, and that's really the conversation that we were going to have today. There is potentially in the future some need for offices, and I don't know if Paul wants to talk about that briefly. I think we've had a detective in, I don't even know if you call it a closet or a storage area.
It's a supply closet.
Supply closet. Since the basic,
Right, since we added that position in 2016,
yeah.
or actually, I believe it was a little before that, but the purpose of that room, we called it a quiet room, was to have a phone and a small desk. So if there's 3 officers or 2 officers in the squad room talking about something and someone's on the phone trying to take a report or talk to a citizen, they're not competing in the same way as the building department. So that's what that room was created for, but we had to put our detective in there because we don't have any other office space. So we were hoping that as we finished out this unfinished space that we could add a couple of offices. And there's probably a variety of ways that can be done. I don't think that would be overly expensive as part of the process, but I guess we'll find out as we move forward. The other piece that we are lacking is a private workspace for our embedded social worker. She doesn't really work out of our office much by choice, just because we don't have a dedicated space for her. That's not really the kind of job that you can have delicate or private conversations with people about in an open or common space. Right now, if she needs to do that type of work from our office, she will use our dictation room behind the secretaries, which works fine if they're not busy working on a dictation, which can be A, it's time consuming, and B, it's typically the county or city attorney with a pretty short deadline, so they have to get that work done. So there isn't a lot of room to say, well, I'll do it tomorrow, then go ahead and have the office type of thing.
So yeah, I'd say in the short term, there's possibly a need for a couple offices. The wellness area, I think that's an easier conversation because there's dedicated outside funding for that right now.
Right.
I think separating the two as a conversation, I think they can kind of run in parallel. But I think in order to get the wellness area done the way it's kind of been discussed, they should almost be separated. But then in the back of our mind, maybe keep an eye on it, and maybe that's something that we can have built. This two offices is not a lot of space. We're probably talking, 200, 400 square feet or something like that, for office space. So we could look into that. We don't even know what that would cost. The area is finished, rough finished, so it's not a complete commercial per square foot cost that you might be used to, $350 or whatever it is for commercial right now, $400. That finished square foot might be, $100 a square foot to finish that off. So we don't know until somebody would look at that. So that's something that we might potentially look at this year to develop some costs for potentially evaluating 24.
I would say with all of the other things, this is my take, and you guys can weigh in too. With all of the other increases that we're looking at, I don't know that we could add yet another, 100,000 or whatever into that in 24 budget. But, when you do the budget, maybe add, or maybe we can't do anything, or maybe we do, 50,000 or maybe 30,000 in 24, and then you do the balance in 25, something like that. So I think you're going to have to stretch it out over a couple of years. That's just a thought. You can get some rough estimates from people to see what we're looking at. Are we looking at $100,000 or are we looking at $300,000? I mean, what are we looking at?
Yeah.
That might give us a better idea too.
Yeah, well, and if they decide to pass the Senate bill, that if we have an idea, we could allocate some of that money then to it and get it done when we do the
Right.
Wellness area.
Right.
For the officers to just get it done and get it done. So if we can, I guess, talk to people and find out what estimates are, the sooner the better, and then just file it away for future if we don't get state money.
Yep. No, we're hopeful that we get that something gets passed and we can use that for something. We might come up with a plan or proposal to phase in some of the costs for the 15th officer and use some of that outside money to, subsidize future years so that it's not as big of a hit in 2024. But yeah, we'll know a lot more in a month.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but that's a good point to keep in mind. So I think initially we should at least figure out what that space, a couple offices might cost, and have somebody look at that and just give us some rough estimates.
Right. I think we should be mindful of whether we finish the offices right away or we don't as part of this project. We should certainly consider putting it in a position where it's really easy to do that later.
Yes.
So that just not creating a plan that now we've made a floor plan that's going to make it really difficult to add offices later.
Yeah. You need a master plan.
Yeah. That's all the facility conversation that I have right now. Because I was going to talk about the bill, the public safety bill update, that SF 2416, crime prevention fund donation of that $200 or $200,000, and then that wellness area partnership potential with Lifetime.
So it was the crime prevention fund that gave us the 200,000.
It was, so the way it worked logistically was the individual donated the money to the crime prevention fund earmarked for Minnetrista wellness. So that they have the money, it's known that that's going to get used for our facility.
And definitely earmarked for wellness, not gun range.
Correct.
Correct.
But if we get the 690,000,
Yeah, well,
then maybe do.
as an extension of the facilities, Paul and I have talked about the gun range quite a bit to try to find different pathways. We've talked to Stock and Barrel, we've talked to Minnetonka Gun Club to see if there's partnership potentials there. neither of those panned out. The next thing was, hey, well, what's the lowest entry point we can get to get this done? And Paul got some additional quotes, and because of increased HVAC costs and maybe some reduction in other things, it actually, I think, either went down $20,000 or up $20,000.
Right, it didn't change.
It didn't change much.
You
So
just got a lot less.
yeah, you get a lot less. You wait a couple of years, things are going to go up, especially in the climate we have right now. So, but we're still in the, what is the range, Paul? What, is it still $500,000-ish?
Well, it's, I'm trying to think off the top of my head here.
I thought it was
It's
350.
about 300.
300,000. Okay.
Yeah.
So, if that's something that, if we get the funding, we could look at. So, not much to report on other than we've been kind of working all these different kind of back channels to see if there's some way to get a
And
partnership.
The other thing too with the gun ranges in future years, I think we should start plugging in maybe if it's 50,000 or 75,000 a year, and then maybe after 3 or 4 years, whatever it might take, we can actually have enough money to do the gun range. So I think eventually we should do it. It'd be nicer sooner than later, and I agree if we get the state funding that we should look at all options. But if we don't, then at least I think we should also be looking to the future. Maybe, like I said, maybe 75,000 a year for a few years, and then we could do it.
We'll, we'll add that to the budget discussion.
That might be number 99.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So 75,000. I mean, roughly.
And that's a 3% increase.
Well,
Or 35.
yeah. So roughly
A 1.5.
every
1.5.
every 60,000 is about
Something
1%.
higher.
Yes, yeah, well, 1.5% increase. So,
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So
Like I said, maybe not next year, but following year. So anyhow,
Yeah.
okay.
that's all I have for the staffing and facilities discussion. If there's anything that anybody wants to bring up, now would be the time to do so.
Okay, we're good. Ordinance?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. And included in your packet is a summary of the proposed updates to the city code with regards to stormwater management. So to give a little bit of a background, the city is under the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. It's called an MS4 permit. We love our acronyms. The Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Permit. This was initially enacted, it's over 20 years ago initially, and it's essentially cities of a certain size or entities of a certain size. For example, the airport is an MS4 as well, has to have certain rules and regulations in place in order to ensure that stormwater runoff is properly managed. So a few years ago, the Pollution Control Agency started updating the MS4 permitting requirements. Certainly through the pandemic, there were some hiccups and lags in time. But we are at a point now where the Pollution Control Agency has provided guidance for cities through the audit system that we just went through with the Pollution Control Agency to get everything in line for the new permit, which includes an ordinance update to address the stormwater management through construction, chloride reduction, and animal waste. So included in your packet is it is a red line, so to speak, of the proposed ordinance. What we did is we took we named a new chapter called the Stormwater Chapter 16, and then included in blue is all of the language that would be that's being proposed to be in compliance with this MS4 permit. This language is the PCA did provide a template for this, and so we're comfortable with the language that's being provided meets the requirements through the PCA. So the blue language is new. It goes through, which is essentially good practices that are already in place. I know the chloride reduction, I had chatted with Gary with the language that's being proposed in here, and he indicated that it was work they were already doing. It's just codifying it so that there's assurances to the pollution control agency that the city's fully invested in performing these to these standards. And then on page 15 of your packet shows where we've pulled in city code language that's already in place under this chapter, so that all of the stormwater language would be in one place within the city code. So it goes through, that's shown in red. Again, it's existing language that's already in city code, but would be moved under the stormwater chapter so that all of the stormwater language is in one place. Certainly a very lengthy, I did provide a link in the cover memo so that anybody that, I'm sorry, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, but if you're having problems going to sleep, you might want to read up on these minimum control measures. They're great standards that are in place. Don't get me wrong. It's important to protect our stormwater within the state of Minnesota. And again, this is to bring the city within compliance of these new rules. So. Again, we've gone through it on a staff level. We're comfortable proposing it to council, and I would be happy to answer any questions or address any concerns that the council may have with the proposal.
Thank you.
I'll start. Picky stuff, but things to think about. Page 10. And you said the blue is new?
Correct.
Okay. So page 10, in there, it talks about the volume reduction practices. And it says volume, all right, I guess you need to get to page 10. Are you there?
Yep.
In the middle of that first paragraph, it says volume reduction practices are not required if the practices cannot be provided cost effectively. And my question is, what's your definition of cost effectively? And in what era? Because cost effectively a year ago is not cost effectively today. So, in other words, my point of bringing it up is not to be that fussy about it.
Mm-hmm.
My point is that anybody could decide it's not cost effective. And should there maybe be different wording to that? Because if you want it done, you can't just say,
Yeah. It's very ambiguous. Mm-hmm.
Certainly.
Arbitrary.
No, that's a good point, and certainly these are a balance of providing flexibility within the ordinance language so that we can meet the spirit of what we want to accomplish, but certainly to this effect, to look at some kind of threshold or standard or some sort of metric that we can come up against.
let me take it one step further.
Sure.
Who is the person who's going to decide whether it's cost effective?
Typically, in the first part of the ordinance, we state who is the responsible party for seeing the implementation of this section of code. And that would be the individual that would be charged with evaluating the cost effectiveness.
So, if I may, I think what would happen is we would the standards are set, and if a developer comes in and says, "Well, this isn't cost effective for me to do this. Here's 6 reasons why," City Council could decide to say, "Yeah, that's fine." Or they could say, "Nope, we don't think that is." So there's a gray area that is decided by the governing body, but
it would come to council or would come to somebody who's actually going to make a decision on it.
if it would
can't flagrantly say it's not cost effective.
correct, they would have to pitch it to somebody, and if we say, "Well, we don't have the authority to say it is or isn't," then the
How
governing
about
body
this?
would.
Just remove that sentence.
Oh,
Why does it have to be in there then?
I think it's important to be in there.
See,
You know,
because
it's cost effective.
but that gives them an out. I think I agree with that. That gives them an out,
them
and
an out.
anybody could come and say, "Well, this is too cost costly. I don't want to do it. So don't have it in there. They can still come and say, this is just cost prohibitive. We can't do it.
Right.
And then we can still make that. But then this isn't the, how do you say, they don't read this and go, oh, I get to do this. Well, this
might
is
just
too,
default to
yeah,
that
default.
position.
Well,
Yeah.
hey, it's too cost effective. So just leave it out. Leave that
Right.
sentence out. That doesn't mean they can't come and ask for, not being able to do it. But this kind of sets a stage that, hey, okay, if it's too costly, just come and ask us and we'll say fine. I mean,
Okay.
so all you have to do is it says volume reduction practices are not required if the practices cannot be provided cost effectively. Just take that sentence out.
And I don't know if that'll have any. The PCA will say, "Oh, this didn't follow our template 100%." If they'd have any input, I don't know, Gary. You and Allison, you guys deal with the auditor directly.
Well, that's the
you know what?
question.
Then you'll tell us.
Do we have to have everything in there? I mean, are we just wasting our time reviewing it, or do we actually have some say and say, no, we don't want this part in there?
Right.
Oh, you certainly have say in it. You're representing the city of Minnetrista, and our job is to present the code for your consideration on your comfort level. There's certainly room for changes and adjustments, and we would, if this is something that the council wants to look at striking, then my next step would be to just connect with the individual who provides assistance with the MPCA MS4 permit, and then get her feedback. She can talk to the PCA. I can't imagine they would.
I just would submit it. And if they catch it, they call us.
True. And
I mean, why ask permission? Why not just do it?
yeah. Well, and if
Sorry.
anything, you're being more restrictive,
Yeah,
not less
exactly.
restrictive. So
Exactly.
I would be very surprised if they had heartburn over that change.
Yeah, I don't think they would catch it, but I mean, it's like anything that you have the OSHA, all that.
Yeah.
They got their standards, but you can make it more restrictive. You just can't go less than what they're stating.
Correct. Yep.
All right.
Okay.
So we're going to strike that.
Nothing.
No, go ahead. That's why I'm looking at you. Go ahead.
And page 11, under 1600.05, subdivision 2, definition of what this is. All private stormwater best management practices must be maintained by the owners such that the BMPs perform the intended treatment function. What does it actually mean?
Oh, yeah. That we need to keep in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't say we had to take it out. I just want to know what it means.
So I can provide an explanation, if that's all right, Madam Mayor. So BMP's best management practices. So an example is a recent example in Minnetrista would be the Halstead Hill subdivision on Halstead Drive. Included in that proposal was a stormwater management feature on each lot to meet rate control, so that after they build a home on the property, the rate that the water comes off the site doesn't exceed the rate that it's currently at. That's a BMP, a stormwater BMP, and so in order for them, the developer, the builder, to have that BMP in place, they would be required to maintain it so that, like, for example, if it's filtering through there, like a sand filter, that they have to go and clean through the sand filter, that sort of thing. So these are things that also citywide with developments, for example, stormwater management ponds that come in developments. For the most part in Minnetrista, those facilities are owned and maintained by the homeowners association, not by the city. And so we want to have the assurances and the agreements in place, if you will, to illustrate and to identify that it's a private facility and to be maintained by that person.
Okay, that's good. And then who checks on this at what frequency?
Great question. So the city has a surface water asset management program, we love our acronyms. SWAMP.
Swamp.
It's the SWAMP score. So similar to what we see for pavements, where we rate them 0 to 100, we also have scores for stormwater best management practices. And that's it's a program that generates that number based on the area that drains to it and the type of land cover through there. And we just went through this exercise a handful of years ago where we looked at what the score was for various basins throughout the city and reached out to the homeowners associations associated with those facilities and said, hey, our program's telling us that your BMP there might need some maintenance. So that's how we keep track of it. We're certainly in progress as far as implementing the program. There's, we're still learning from it, but we did have, I did work with one HOA that provided me the documentation necessary so that we can assure it's still functioning as designed.
Okay. All right. I think that does it for me.
Okay. Thank you.
Under violations and penalty and enforcement, subdivision 1, paragraph D, it's page 12. It says the city may assess the remaining amount against property. Why wouldn't it just say the city will assess? And then also the applicant shall waive notice of any assessment hearing to be conducted by the city, agree with benefit, etc. Is that legal to have them waive that just by getting the permit? Like, can they waive their right to that just by requesting the permit? That to me seemed kind of, I don't know, forceful. Like, just because you're getting this, you're waiving your.
Well, and this is, and I can certainly follow up with the city attorney's office. From our standpoint, from the city standpoint, I would recommend leaving that in there, and the reason being is that the city, because the city has to go and administer and enforce this section of code to allow permit holders to.
Basically, the city has to go through a 429 process if we want to assess them. And so what we're saying here is they agree to waive that process because it's costly and it's very time consuming.
Thank you.
That's what this is for. So they're just saying, yeah, okay, fine. If I don't do this and you want to assess me, you don't have to go through the process.
Okay.
Is that?
No, I get it. I just wasn't sure how much that would hold up. Like, oh, you got the permit now. Just by as a condition of the permit, you waived your 429. It's more my question of how.
Well, you could, but then the city would actually have to be assessed even more because then they would have to be assessed for the whole process, which would cost more too.
So back on page 5, where it says the illicit connection, and then it says. Paragraph A at the end, it says, regardless of whether the drain or connection had been previously allowed, permitted, or approved. So if someone has a drain that was previously allowed and approved, it's now considered illicit based on the changing rules, and there's nothing the homeowner can do about it.
Where? Okay.
Oh, I see.
Right
Where,
here. Yeah. Okay.
My concern is there's a lot of older homes that may have these connections that are now illegal, basically, where they have been previously approved.
Well, one of the ones that I've seen in the past, and where we have egg community, is that sometimes egg producers tie their tiles into our stormwater system. I don't know if we have any.
I don't think we have that here. Do we?
I don't believe so.
But that's like, we want to say that's illegal because that could be a lot of water.
That could be a lot.
Homeowners might have their sump pumps, connected. I don't know if we have any of that.
We do have.
I'm sure we have that around, but that's common in a lot of cities that they do that.
But I think as long as if we say it's illegal, we want it to be illegal. Basically, I think is what this is saying. So if we determine it's an illegal discharge entering our system, then this gives us the ability to declare that, and then it's then illegal. If we don't declare it illegal, then it's not.
So if that were to be the case, it would be a sump pump situation by a homeowner. And if they are discharging it, there's a couple of things to consider. If we're discharging it into our storm drain system, then that goes into it can go into the sewer, number one. A lot of it goes into the sewer, and what that does is it overflows, or the volume is too much for the sewer to handle at times. So that's one thing you want to make sure that isn't happening. The other thing is our storm drain systems, that goes into our streams and lakes. I suppose that the MPCA is concerned about certain quality of water going into our storms and sewers.
Right.
That's what it is. So,
well, like in our neighborhood,
Yeah.
like my sump pump drains into the backyard, which runs into whatever little creek has been
Right.
put there, which then runs into Lake Minnetonka. And the people that live on the other side of the street, theirs runs onto the street, which then runs into the stormwater drain.
Right.
So, based on that, those would now be illegal, even though they have no control over.
I don't think that's
Yeah.
illegal.
So illegal discharge. So in the definition above that, illegal discharge is direct or indirect non-stormwater discharge. So a drain tile connection would be considered legal. What they're referring to as an illegal discharge or an illicit connection is non-stormwater. So if you had, they include some examples like processed wastewater, sewage, wash water. So to the mayor's point, this is water that belongs in the sanitary sewer, not in the storm sewer, and so that's why it's included in here. And even if it was previously permitted, the idea here is to say this is not a storm sewer discharge. This is a sewer discharge and needs to be treated accordingly.
So the sewer would make it illicit.
A lot of common ones back in the day were people in their garages had their own drain system, and it would go to a tile system outside. So basically your car would melt off and go into this, but a lot of you'd get a lot of also gas, oil, and that discharging into there too. So that's one of the things that they eliminated. That if you can even get a permit, which is very tough to do, you have to have sand traps, everything in, and put that into your sanitary now. So that was one of the very common things that they were trying to get rid of, and getting that out of the system so you don't get all that toxic water going into the systems too. So.
And that actually sparks a question too. I'm not sure if plumbing code allows that anymore.
I'm not certain if they can. I mean, I know back in the day you could if you had all your proper, basically be like a commercial building with all your sand traps and all that and your oil traps and stuff. But, but that's one of the things that they really tried to put a kibosh on, get rid of them drains that are in garages.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could answer this question for me. So I live on a cul-de-sac street, or a dead-end street, and off a busy highway, or kind of Route 44. And so people tend to like to walk their dogs along our street because it's quiet. I had a neighbor call and say, how do I stop neighbors from walking? She's in the first house on our street, and it's got kind of a big public area right in front of her property. And she said, we can actually smell the amount of dog poop that is on this piece of property. And I said, I really don't know. I'll check in. And then she said, once the snow melted, it was shocking how much, because it's like, same people take their dogs out every day. And so when the snow melted today, I walked down to my mailbox. I noticed the same thing along our yard. And so I was, talking to Jasper. I'm frustrated when there's ordinances, but there's really no repercussion. What could we do? Maybe put a note from the mayor. It's melting. People are going to see, what you've been doing with your dog in their yard. I don't know. And maybe we even make it funny, but it's not funny. And people do tend to, sometimes they'll throw the, waste in the storm drains.
Well, we could, we could put an article in the newsletter advising people that whatever you put in the storm drain, that goes into our lakes. Guess what? You swim there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a good point. But we can't prevent them legally from walking on the street. But we may be putting up signs might be of help.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor? Oh.
Yeah.
Apologies. So if once the council considers this for adoption on page 14, there is a section on animal waste that addresses this very situation. Now, to Councilmember Lacey's point, it's you'd have to catch somebody in the act, but it does include a citation. So, assuming that the council would adopt the ordinance as we've presented it here, for particularly with animal waste, an idea would be to include in the next city newsletter, hey, did you know that council changed an ordinance and includes animal waste, and just include some of those highlights.
Yeah,
That might be
and I
good
think
public
highlight it.
education.
And I can do with social media posts.
Yeah, I think so.
I can do it tomorrow. Let people know.
I mean, people should, should take a bag with them if they're out walking their dog.
Yep.
I mean, absolutely. And you know what is so irritating is, why do they poop in other people's yards?
Exactly.
Not in their own. I mean,
Yeah.
You guys don't have dogs, do you?
Well, we do, but guess what? Well, we don't anymore. But guess what? There are responsible dog owners, and then there are non-responsible.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
non-responsible dog owners.
And we have dog waste stations throughout the city in high-use areas. So if there's a high-use area that makes sense, that we could.
We've been putting them in a lot of parks. A lot of the HOAs have been asking for them, and we've been putting them in a lot of the parks. I think we have 5 of them now, and so we keep putting them up. So, and they are heavily used. So,
Yeah.
It's
I do believe we have an ordinance. Do we not, Paul? There,
I believe we do. I'd have to.
I don't know what. I couldn't find it right away, but I'm almost positive every city almost does. So.
Yeah.
Right, and the challenge would be trying to witness that event occurring is where the difficulty comes. For us anyway, in order to be able to cite somebody would have to witness it. Either one of us or somebody who would be willing to go to court and testify that they saw so-and-so allow this. And
Well,
that
what
could-
if someone's, walking 3 big dogs, and, Minnetrista is kind of a low crime area, and a peace officer could say, and this sounds very micromanaging, but can I see your waste bags? Is that just crazy?
No, they
Yeah, we
that,
can't.
that
Would
wouldn't.
just say they already went and I threw them away.
Right.
Like you can't. That
Yeah.
wouldn't do.
People
But then
would
what
not
if they go
take
again? You have no more bags?
Every dog is different. I would assume. I mean, I don't
I think education at this point, and like I said, maybe even a sign out on Lauren
Yeah.
Drive
Or,
saying,
I
don't
think,
don't allow your dogs,
Yeah.
to
Yeah, respect your neighbors.
yeah, respect your
neighbors.
neighbors. Yeah, pick up after your dog. Yeah. Maybe Lauren Drive people would be willing to pay for something like that. I mean,
a receptacle? Is that what you said?
a sign.
Oh, a sign.
or an Eagle Scout project.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
you go. Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll have to
Very
install
good.
one of those outdoor cameras.
Yeah, there you go. too.
that works too.
One of those hunting
Yeah.
outdoor cameras.
Oh.
All right, but yeah, it's a huge problem. All right, any other comments? Otherwise, we'll leave it at that with removing that one sentence. Everything else,
Yep.
should we bring it to the regular council meeting then with that one change?
So an item of note, it is on consent agenda to right now. I think we can
Just pass
modify it based on this tonight and then consider it on consent. The direction I'd say we received is to make those modifications. We'll make those modifications before we publish that.
Can I just ask one more question?
Oh, sure.
For the under the 1620.03 definitions, under waters of the state, why does it say irrigation systems?
I'm catching up with you. I'm sorry. You said
Which-
1620.
Yeah. Yeah, 1620.03, and then under the definitions, it's the last one, waters of the state. It's also in the surface waters or waters on page 8.2 where it says irrigation systems.
So what's your?
That's
Why does it
so
say
why are
irrigation
irrigation
systems?
systems in there? That's a good question. So this is what's already in city code and is just being moved over to the stormwater section. But I'm not sure because it has irrigation systems and drainage systems
See,
as well.
I was going to say drainage systems are usually rural, and there are some drainage ditches that are actually designated as state-owned or public waters. Is that not true?
Yeah, well, it's also referencing a section of the statutes, and I'm wondering if they mean by irrigation systems, if they mean agricultural irrigation
that's what I
systems.
think.
I
Yes.
think so, irrigation ditches.
Yeah, I think that's what they're referencing. So maybe to clarify that, it should just say agricultural irrigation systems or
I would have to get. I'm just guessing,
Yeah.
and so I would prefer to get clarification on that before providing council guidance on that, because I think that's probably it, but I'd prefer to be certain.
I agree. So we'll remove it from consent then, and then just research that, and then once you've made that change or clarify it, then we can put it on consent for the next meeting.
Okay.
And then I have one more quick one. Sorry.
Okay, fine.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
In that same section under pollutant, which is just a couple scrolls up,
Yep.
it says fertilizers. Should that be like specified for commercial fertilizers versus like the true green people put on their yard? Because in my mind, that covers all fertilizer that every resident would use versus agricultural fertilizers and whatnot.
That's a good point.
Okay. Okay, I'll get clarification
just-
on that.
But
as
you're
well.
are you looking at the red?
Yeah, it's in
The
our
red
current-
one, I don't know if that's in there anymore.
No,
This is our current code. The red one is our current code.
Okay.
That's correct.
And just how I read it, it implied that, like, let's say I throw true green all over my yard, it rolls onto the street and then into the stormwater thing. It would be considered a pollutant, all those little white pebbles, whatever they are. So I don't know if,
I think
Homeowners and any
commercial.
commercial applicator is supposed to blow off and clean off all hard surfaces. So, and that is in the actual code for doing any application of any fertilization like that. So any granular has to be cleaned off the hard surface and into the grass.
right, I understand that. Like my front yard, there's a stormwater drain right next to it. So, I mean, I can clear it all off, but in some ways it could still end up in there. So I just don't know how, I guess, strict that.
The other
Or
thing
if
is
it's fine,
even
it's fine.
commercial fertilizers or people that apply commercially, they still have to meet the standards for fertilizer. It's fertilizer. It has to meet the standards for phosphor, not have any phosphorus and things like that. So I don't know if that makes a difference.
Certainly, these are great questions, and I think that it warrants just a little bit of investigation and clarification.
Okay.
And then the goal being to bring it at a future council meeting under consent with the cover memo providing clarification based on these questions.
Yes, I think that'll be great.
That's good.
Okay, good questions. Thank you very much. With that, then any other questions?
I'm good now.
Okay, just want to make sure. All right, with that, then we can be adjourned. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. And is there a second?
Second.
Anne made that second. All those in favor signify with aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion passes. Thank you. All right.